And often I've found that when we ask God for help, He sends the people that love us to answer those prayers.
Christ is so simple. His arithmetic is a child can comprehend it.
At the end of the day, I think people in general want to say yes. We want to help people accomplish their goals, but most people stop themselves. Like, we're our own worst enemy.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Profiles. I'm Brian Howard. We're here at the LDS Motion Picture Studio in Provo, Utah. And joining me today is Amanda Taylor. Amanda, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Amanda has recently finished a book, an Uncharted Devotion. Let me get that right. It's a romance type novel. I'll have you tell me more about that. Okay. Let's get a little bit into your background though, Amanda. Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, but since being married, we've moved around a little bit. So. Yeah, but we're back in Utah now. So
give me some background about writing. And most people I've discovered who are good writers also really enjoy reading. So were you an avid reader?
Yes, that's definitely where my roots came from. In high school, I discovered classical historical romance. Jane Austen was like my first love. And I just became an avid reader, and I loved the genre, loved the historical aspect, and it just became a passion of mine. And so really I've been an avid reader for a long time because I really didn't start seriously writing until about 5 years ago. But I was an English major, and I always knew that, you know, words were my strength and writing was how I like to express myself. But I just got into fiction and writing seriously 5 years ago. So.
Did you, so when you were picking like a major in college, was this the natural? You look up and down the catalog, it's like, no. Yes, was there only one place for you?
Yeah, there really was. And I know this sounds silly, but I've said this a few times, that instead of like in math, instead of finding the right answer, I like to make up my own answer and find supporting evidence for that answer. So I really enjoyed writing and, of course, reading. So yeah, that was my strength.
Did you have any particular goal there? You know, you're going into English. I know it's one of those things where people say, you know, it's like, you're going to English, what are you going to do, right? Did you have some particular goals that you
know what? I did think about teaching a little bit, but I was starting a family right at the same time as I was finishing. So I jumped into young motherhood right after I graduated. And so I didn't really pursue, you know, a solid career goal at that point. But yeah, I thought teaching, I thought maybe writing, I thought maybe journalism, but yeah.
Something came up. You got married and started a family. In fact, I was reading that you were graduating, finished up with your degree, and expecting. How was that last semester? That had to be kind of crazy experience.
It was a little bit brutal. I remember taking snacks because I had that morning sickness feeling, and I just knew I had to get through those classes before my baby came, or it might never happen. So it was really great timing, actually, because I was able to finish up my last classes. I walked in June and I was graduating in August, and so I was 7 months pregnant with my cap and gown. I have fun pictures of that, and then I took my last final the same week that my baby was born. So wow. I just really slid in right under the wire.
And got it just in time.
Yeah.
Perfect. No preterm, which is great.
Right. I'm like, we can't go early on this. We've got timing. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you meet your husband? Did you meet him at college?
We actually met. He was a videographer for a wedding video company while in college, and so we just met at one-time meeting at my sister's wedding. And I had been home from my mission about 1 month, and so it was kind of perfect timing. He claims he saw me through the editing bay when we came into and had an interest in asking me out. So he actually put his name down on my sister's wedding and came to the temple grounds and with the intention to ask me out. So,
oh wow!
Yeah,
and it worked.
It did.
Smart guy.
Yeah, one-time meeting and it took. Yeah.
Tell me about your mission. You went to Texas. How did that experience, change you? What kind of, was it a transformative experience? How was that for you?
Oh, absolutely was. So I went to South Texas, right on the border.
Oh, wow.
McAllen, Texas is like right on the border. The last little triangle at the end of Texas, and it was Spanish speaking. All the missionaries are Spanish speaking. And it's just a really fascinating place. Most people speak Spanish, but if they see a blonde girl coming, there's a fair amount of English. So I did speak a fair amount of English, but The culture there, the people were so humble and so rich and so warm. But just really diving into the gospel of Jesus Christ and just my faith in my personal relationship with my Savior as I navigated that process. I got sick a few times, and just really digging in and trying to, endure through some of the struggles of a mission, which, it can be long and hard, but so rewarding and so joyful too. So anyway, it was totally transformative in that I feel like I shifted my entire perspective. I think now of my life as a mission. My husband and I both are really, missionary minded, and just raising our family in all the, solid values of the gospel. And so it really was a pivot point for me, for sure.
Now, when did you fit in? You did an internship at the U.S. Supreme Court. That sounds pretty daunting. When did that happen? How did you do that?
Yeah, so actually the University of Utah has a fantastic Institute of Politics. It's called the Hinckley Institute of Politics. And they have so many opportunities for undergraduates to go back to Washington and intern with senators, with congressmen, with lobbying groups. And there are 2 spots for Utah interns at the Supreme Court. And I'm not sure if there still are, but the administrative assistant of the Supreme Court was a Utah resident for a long time, and so he provided those 2 spots. So I worked in the curator's office, which they keep a history of the day-to-day goings-on of the court, and I gave tours of all the, insides and outs of the Supreme Court. Any constituents that wanted to come and take a tour, I was one of those that would give them a tour, and it was so fascinating. It was just incredible. I met some of the justices, and most of the justices, they have interns, but those are like Harvard law students and people that are, really accomplished in those areas. But yeah, it was fantastic experience.
Gain any insights about the workings of the Supreme Court justice system? It sounds pretty intense.
Yeah. Well, of course you get really involved in the energy of, the government, and just really the checks and balances in the different branches of government. Like, I just always was fascinated with the court because they don't legislate anything. Any problems to solve or any decisions to make are brought before them, and then they maintain or try to maintain a really, really unbiased and objective view of it all. And it's just such an intellectual component of government there, and really, it was fascinating.
Wow, sounds a lot of fun. Sounds intimidating, but fun.
Yeah, it was great though.
Yeah. So you met your husband, you end up finishing up school, and it sounds like you kind of whisked away at that point, raising family, 3 more kids. Mary, the oldest,
Mary's
right?
my oldest. Yeah, and then Scott came 18 months later, James and Eliza, and they were born all within 6 years. So we just kind of boom, had kids, and I was definitely in the throes of young motherhood. And we also moved to Las Vegas right after Scott was born. So we were in Las Vegas for 6 years and Arizona for 10, and that was fantastic, just being away as a family and forging our own identity as our young family. Yeah, and so I worked at my kids' school. I did a little bit of teaching support, and that's when I kind of, like 5th grade grammar, really got into, helping the kids and helping them write papers in middle school and that kind of thing. So that did kind of start planting seeds of I'm telling the kids to add detail and show me, don't tell me, and give me some imagery here, and, just basic writing skills that I kind of crept in as I was a teaching support.
Yeah, the kids appreciate that input on their papers.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It sounds like you're probably following jobs around, right? Las Vegas and other places.
Yeah.
What brought you back to Utah?
My husband's work, his company brought him back to run a division of their company back here, and they knew that we might be a good fit because we're Utah natives, and my parents were, getting older, and it was a nice thing to be by family and that kind of thing. So we moved back. But my kids, wow, Mary was a junior in high school, so that's not an easy time to move. But they did great, and they jumped into life here and have thrived. So it's been okay.
So during those years of young motherhood, obviously still interested in reading and writing. Although I don't know, don't have nearly as much time to read.
Yeah.
Maybe in the middle of the night.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
I found time. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So when you decided it was time, okay, I want to start writing, what did you decide to do that?
Well, so the cool thing about this story is it's like, I feel like for anyone out there who has ever like had a dream that's kind of just settled into the back of their mind and they thought, oh, the time has passed or whatever. The cool thing about my story is that I started this whole second journey, you know, in my 40s. And I know that's not very old, but you know, I didn't start out,
Right.
you know, in my 20s. And we moved to Utah, and, you know, my kids were a little more independent. Space opened up in my life. And I kind of was like, what do I do next? Like I just found kind of more space, and I really started praying about kind of my next phase, my next purpose, and just these thoughts of writing just kept circling through my mind. And so I just started kind of just tinkering with some things, and finally when I got enough confidence, I told my family, I think I'm going to write a book. And I knew exactly the genre that I would be in, and so that's how it kind of all started. And then, as being in Utah, certain people just started popping up in my life that were assets to me. Jennifer Moore is a Covenant author, and she happened to live right by me, and I met her at the PTA table at my kids' school, and I'm like, I love your books. You know, do people recognize you everywhere you go? And she's like, no. But, you know, she's turned out to be a huge mentor and friend throughout this process. And anyway, Deseret Book, they have imprints, Shadow Mountain and Covenant, and they have this great historical romance genre, proper and wholesome romance. And it just seemed like a really good fit for me. So when I was finished with my book, then I was able to submit to Covenant. You don't need an agent because it's small press, and they accept manuscripts. Just
Yeah.
you know.
Well, they look at a lot of them. They don't accept them all.
Well,
so
that is true.
That's impressive.
It's kind of, I feel like maybe I did some of my time as an early teacher. I'm not sure, but it was really incredible experience to be accepted on my first
That's really
submission and my first attempt at writing a book. But it's been an incredible journey. Yeah. So I know it's true. There's a ton of writers out there and a ton of talented, really incredible writers. So I feel really privileged to be able to.
That's awesome. You get the first one in there. So was this because of the style that they had there at Covenant with the romance that you chose that, or was this kind of a natural predilection? I really like this style and I want to write to it.
Well, it was my passion, but I had read so many Covenant titles and Shadow Mountain titles. I remember when Edenbrook came out like 12 years ago. It was kind of the first within this niche genre, and it just sparked my imagination. And I have been a huge fan of all things Jane Austen and the Regency era. She wrote in the Regency era, so it's kind of become immortalized because of her. And there are a lot of us out there who are huge fans of that genre. And so when I started writing, that was just the voice that came, and the time period. I have read enough books and watched enough series on the BBC and other things that language is pretty present in my mind. And so it was a good fit for me.
Yeah.
But I knew it was really lucky of me that my writing style fit in right into that particular niche of publishing.
Yeah, I did not know what Regency was until I started working with people who were others. Oh, now I know.
Yeah.
I just didn't know what it was called.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
It's kind of one of those things, if you know, you know. And about 95% of our readership is women. But there are some men out there who their wives, you know, they like share it with their wives or whatever.
Secretly read it.
Yes,
Don't want anybody to know.
Yeah. So.
Tell me about your writing process. So you say you finished the book, but that's a laborious process. So how did you decide, figuring characters, plot, and that kind of thing? How did you go through that process of figuring out what this first book was going to be about?
Okay, so the first book, I actually feel like it's kind of a love letter to some of my favorite literature. So Jane Austen's Persuasion, the hero in that story is a Royal Navy captain. And I've always been kind of fascinated with the Royal Navy because at the same time that there was like this genteel society and all these, like the upper class didn't work and they were pretty privileged, those same men would go to war and fight in either the Army or the Navy. And it was the height of the age of sail, and so that, you know, they would go to war at seas, and the British Navy was unmatched in their superiority and their military prowess. And the Napoleonic Wars were going on at the same time as this whole thing. So I was really intrigued by all of that history. And then these military men would come home and try to insert themselves back into their lives after years away. And I was just really intrigued by, you know, the distance and the sacrifice and all the things that they went through. And then also the women in that time, they didn't have very many choices, and they had to navigate a lot of difficult circumstances. And so my book actually starts with a couple who marry, and then he leaves for his naval service and comes back 5 years later, and they have to navigate. You know, he's very changed and injured by a lot of his war experiences, and they find their way back to each other. So that's one of the reasons I really love that time period, is that people's choices, women could not own property, they couldn't have a job, they couldn't be independent. Their job was to find and marry, you know, a husband who could support them and have a family. And if those things didn't fall into place, it became extremely difficult for them to navigate life. So I've always been really intrigued by those circumstances. And Jane Austen's heroines, they fought those same circumstances, but they, you know, they stayed true to their hearts, and they really, you know, surpassed some of those limitations. And so
Definitely an area that speaks to you, and you can connect with it really
yeah,
well.
for
Tell me,
sure.
tell me the nuts and bolts. So, you know, so when you decide I'm going to write this book, do you set aside hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, night, day? How did you decide, you know,
Yes.
how are we going to process it?
So I'm definitely not one of those people that it just all came to me one night and I'm just like writing for days. I have to sit myself down, and it really just, there's some hemming and hawing that comes, and just a lot of just thinking and processing. And I'm one of those people that I really have to start writing before the plot comes to me, and then some bones of the plot. Like, really my writing process starts with the characters and maybe a premise, you know, like this Royal Navy captain and his wife, and what must his world look like, and what must the difficult circumstances or obstacles they have to overcome. And then from there is born, you know, the bones of a story. And then as I write, those things kind of flesh out. And then of course there's a lot of revising after, because, you know, you kind of get this rough version down, and then the magic really happens when you go back and do a ton of revisions, and just every time you go back to it, just things come and details are filled in. And Shannon Hill is a Utah writer, and she said first draft is about moving piles of sand, and then the revising is about building the sandcastle, you know, all the intricacies after. So it's kind of like you really try to get the bones down. I always imagine in my head maybe someone who's sketching a picture, and, you know, those big structural lines come into play at first, and then all the detail gets filled in, and the shading and shadowing and stuff like that. So
How do you know when you're done? You know, the old adage, you're never done, you just run out of time.
yeah. Listen, when I have told my family I'm done with this manuscript several times. I submitted it, thought I was done. Then the Covenant came back and said, you know what, this has so much potential, but these are these changes we want you to make. So I make those. Then I get assigned my editor, and they accept the submission. And then we go through another editing process. And so I did my preliminary revisions. And then once I got into the publishing, then they took it from there, and which I really appreciate, because that added support and direction was really helpful for me. So with my editor, there were several visions after that. And then it goes to the proofreaders, and then it goes to, you know, the different committees that approve it and fine tune it. So there's a ton of editing and finishing on those books.
I think it's always a cool experience for someone who, you know, there's ebooks galore, but when you see a physical copy of your book, that's pretty cool. What was that experience like to see, hey, this is actually a book and my name's on it?
It was incredible. Covenant sent this book of, you know, because you get your personal copies, and I got this box in the mail with like 40 books in it, and just opening, it was like Christmas morning times 10, opening this box. Covenant does such a beautiful job with their covers. I mean, it's just, they really put a lot of time and effort into those. And so it was just gorgeous, and the raised lettering and my name, and then flipping through it and my picture in the back. It was surreal and really cool and fun to share with my family.
Yeah. What's your family think of your kids and your husband? What do they think of this whole process? What has been their feedback?
Oh man, it's been such a fun thing to share with them. My husband was the first one that read the story after I kind of completed that initial draft, and he just said, "I have been married to you for 20 years, and I didn't know that all this was going on inside of you," which was really touching. My daughter read it, and she stayed up all night and read it, and she just said, "Mom, these characters are incredible," and we were able to share that together. And then, my younger kids haven't read it yet, but they just think I'm cool. They're excited. They're excited to, my mom's a writer, my mom's an author. That's really fun, and I love to give my kids that you can pursue your passions, you can develop your skills and talents. Creation, like creating whatever you pursue, it's just a way to really embrace your full potential in life, and it's an amazing process. So it's fun for me to show that to them.
You've been able to go out and do some events where people have read your book, book signings. What's been the feedback? What's that like to actually talk to people and say, "Oh, I read your book"?
Oh, it's fantastic. And there's been a ton of positive feedback, but every writer out there gets negative feedback too, of just like, "I thought your, naval captain was really grumpy," or, just like, but it's funny because even those people with those strong reactions, they have an emotion about the story and the journey. So, but so many people have really loved it. And just embraced me as a new author in their community. And so that's been so fun to a process of connection just with the Utah writer community is really robust, and the reader community is too. And so it's just been really fun to engage with all those people.
Yeah, I've noticed that people are very collaborative, very willing to help you out.
Yes. And I don't know what I anticipated, but there's no ego. It's like we all rise together, and there's such a sense of community and connection, and it's fantastic.
So what are your plans now? So this was number one. What are you working on? Do you have more things in the works?
Two is at the proofreaders right now. So we're nearly through the long, massive editing process, and it has a cover and a title, and it's ready to go, and it is set to be released in January. So that's exciting because the first one took a long time to get to press, but then the second one is a little quicker. I'm working on the third. We'll see. Every single book that I write has to be submitted and evaluated by the publisher. So, I'll continue to. Right now, this journey is really fulfilling, and I'll continue. And I do have some, I think maybe I want to write contemporary sometime, which means, like today, present day. We'll see. It'll be fun. A lot of writers that I've known in the past have switched genres, or, there's a lot of different things that people can do and a lot of different paths to take. So I'll just see what happens in the future.
Yeah. How has the process changed from obviously the first one, you're going through it for the first time. Now you've got one almost done, another one in the works. How has that changed? And is it still kind of a grind every day?
Yes, it's actually, it's kind of like one of those things. I don't know. I relate it to maybe exercise, where it's like you have that little mental block, like, "Oh, I don't want to do this," but then you get into it and you're like, "Oh, this is why I love this." Or, well, at least that's how I feel when I like go running or hiking or something. It takes a little push to get out the door, but then you feel every time I write, I'll have these nuggets of creative inspiration or things that happen, just these little magic moments that just keep me coming back. But it's always a grind. I always feel like I have homework. I've got deadlines that I put on myself, really. But, I've got things that I need to complete and finish. And so it's always a grind. I wish it was easier, but then I think it wouldn't be so fulfilling if it was. So.
Yeah. Sounds like things fall into place, kind of divine intervention. Do you see that? And you look back and see how things worked out to make this happen for you?
Oh, totally. It's like most principles in the gospel. It's like you put in a ton of work, but then you just see God's hand as you kind of just work for a purpose. And I really feel like this entire genre and Covenant and are really a blessing to readers, because there's a ton of wholesome, uplifting content out there that, you know, in the reading world, you can encounter all kinds of things, just like movies or music or whatever. And they are just putting out so much high-level, inspiring content. Some LDS based, some, you know, the Regency era was before the gospel was restored, so there's really no mention of, you know, actual like my religion in there, but it's always, you know, really uplifting, and people are people, their experiences and the stakes in their lives, we relate to that, and so it's inspiring to me as a reader and a writer.
And a writer.
Yeah.
So Amanda Taylor, the book is An Uncharted Devotion. You can check it out. If you do a Google, you can find Amanda. There's lots of Amanda Taylors. Make sure to put the author in there.
You're right. Author Amanda Taylor. You probably did that. Yeah. Author Amanda Taylor. I come right up.
Yeah,
and yeah.
that's right.
The cool thing about this day and age is we've got Amazon. We've got all these ways to get our stuff out there. And so it's a great time to be a writer.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time
Thanks,
and
Brian.
chatting today.